Mr. Speaker, I think it is worth discussing the decision made by a federal judge in Hawaii, also in Maryland. We have judges that have become dictators. We have judges that have ceased to abide by the Constitution, abide themselves as politicians, though they do not run for office. Judge, a conscientious and ethical judge, would review a document such as the President's executive order for what it is, what it says, what it does. Intent is not an issue. What does it do? The President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, was seeking and is seeking to protect Americans. But we have judges, they're not interested in protecting Americans so much as they are patronizing and sucking up to the liberals in the country, those in the media, those in entertainment, those in their highbrow circles. They're not interested in following the Constitution nor the law. We had a hearing in the Judiciary Committee on the Ninth Circuit this week. The Ninth Circuit apparently is the most overturned circuit in the country. It has a massive number more cases filed in their circuit than any other circuit. And in fact, I've now filed a bill that would divide the Ninth Circuit so that the Ninth Circuit would be comprised of California only, then all the other states, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, I believe is in Montana, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Hawaii, and territories. May have missed a state. But all of the other states and territories would be in a new 12th Circuit. The judges that are currently on the 12th Circuit Court in my bill that are currently part of the Ninth Circuit would remain with the Ninth Circuit, and we would have a new circuit, and the judges would be appointed by the current president. I know there are a lot of people in California I have great sympathy for that have been begging for years to be carved out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals because their destructive, unconstitutional decisions were doing great harm to those who believe in the Constitution as written, not as some liberal judge thought it should be, as he tries or she tries to play up to friends at their get-togethers. They would be hailed as being so wise. But the truth is, as Scripture talks about, these are people that are wise in their own eyes, but they're doing great harm to the United States of America. When anyone in any kind of leadership position loses their common sense, they are educated beyond common sense. They educate common sense completely out of some folks in the United States now. We have problems. And anytime people are educated and taught to believe that what instinctively they knew or taught was not the right thing to think, and those people become leaders in the country, that country speeds up in its travel down the road to the dustbin of history. And no nation has ever lasted forever. No nation ever will in this world. It's not going to happen. So the question is, from its founding, how long does it go? And it depends on how long the leaders of that nation can keep good sense within their consideration in making decisions. That's not happening. Good sense is not being used by judges who have assumed powers they never had, were never given. Under the Constitution, the powers regarding refugees, immigration, those decisions are left to the president. And some judge may say, oh, you can't consider religion, but indeed, any judge that so says is completely wrong. Thank God, religion has been considered many times, as when Jews were being persecuted and killed, it was appropriate to say we want to welcome Jews out of those horrors as refugees, bring them in. But this nation is being put at risk by judges who are wise in their own eyes. Now, there's an article here about the Hawaii judge. It was written, it's in The Guardian, Les Carpenter, Oliver Laughlin, Liz Barney. Was written apparently before the decision was made, but U.S. District Judge Derek Watson is one of several judges hearing arguments over the ban in the final hours before its implementation. He said on Wednesday afternoon, after hearing oral arguments, that he would issue a written ruling before 6 p.m. Hawaii time. Hawaii was the first state to challenge the second version of Trump's travel ban after the first was halted by the court order. The state argued the ban was unconstitutional. It would suffer damage to its local economy, the various educational and religious institutions. Also argued that some Hawaiians will be prevented from reuniting with family members swept up in the ban. And that is heartrending, but the fact is none of those are a basis for reversing a presidential executive order that Congress gave the president and the Constitution together gave the president to issue. So we also find from comments that the courts didn't look to the four corners of the document and look what the document says, because many of us know that as long as a Constitution is the foundational bedrock for the country, we have a foundation. But when we have judges like this Derek Watson or the judge from Maryland, or James Robart, who issued a ban in the first travel order, when they don't pay attention to the Constitution but pay more attention to what they hear from their liberal friends who are disgusted by the elected President of the United States, and they know they'll be heroes, and they long for the accolades of the intelligentsia, which actually isn't the intelligent. Educated, yes. Intelligent, no. But the Constitution gives certain powers, certain parts of the government. Congress has the power to make decisions on immigration, migration, naturalization, but it has the power to delegate those responsibilities as it sees fit to the president And it has done so. The president has certain powers of his own office, of his own right, to protect the United States of America. But these judges think that you should not consider the fact that one of the most educated people in the world on what Islam is and what it isn't says the Islamic State is Islam. He has a PhD in Islamic Studies from the University of Baghdad, as I recall, and he happens to be head of the Islamic State. But the judge would have us disregard the fact that a man that spent his life studying Islam, the Quran, the Holy Quran, because the Quran that's brought around to some of our offices, they take out verses that have to do with violence against those who are not Muslims. But the Holy Quran, he spent his life studying. But these judges would say, oh, no, you can't consider the fact that these radical Islamists claim to be Muslim or Islamist. You can't consider that. One article out this week pointed out that somebody should tell these judges that the terrorists coming in from the nations designated by the president are Muslim. They're not Christians, they're not Jews, they're not secularists, they're radical Islamists. And it's ridiculous to have to continually state the obvious that we all know, that all Muslims are not a threat to the United States. But it is absurd not to understand that those who in the name of Allah are killing, beheading, torturing, trying to destroy free society in the name of Allah, they should not be allowed into the United States. And if they're U.S. citizens and their goal is to supplant the U.S. Constitution with Sharia law, that's treasonous. And that's why I was so pleased with President Sisi as a Muslim leader telling a room full of imams, we have got to stand up to the radicals who have hijacked our religion. Now, President Obama didn't know that. He kept continuing to say that, oh, no, the Islamic State, it's not Islamic. These Islamic terrorists are not Islamic. When actually wise Muslim leaders like President Sisi, they understand, yes, these people are Islamic. They claim it in the name of Allah. They claim it in the name of the Holy Quran. But they have hijacked our religion, and it's time to stand up to them. And as long as we have world leaders who are, metaphorically speaking, without clothes, and nobody has the nerve among the world leaders to say, you're naked, put on some clothes, again, for those who are educated beyond their intellectual level, that means you got to call it like it is. And don't just go along to play to the crowd, the media, the Hollywood types. Stand up and call it like it is. And we have a president that's trying to do that. And there is no doubt, as Justice Scalia said about one of the ill-advised decisions previously made by the Supreme Court, this will end up costing American lives. These decisions, if they're allowed to stand by these unconstitutional judges, it will cost American lives. And the blood will be on the judges' hands in their pursuit of accolades and popularity among the neo-intellectual elite. They left common sense behind and put our nation at risk. It's tragic. And I have the two decisions. From the courts. The one from the District of Hawaii and the one from Maryland, District of Maryland. But it's interesting, in this article I was reading, Mr. Speaker, it says the judge was going to, within just a matter of brief hours, have his 42 or 3-page decision made. Let's see, this is the Hawaii decision, 43 pages. Seems to me somebody must have been working on that before the case, or before oral arguments. The decision must have been worked on before that to have a 43-page decision just within a matter of a few hours. But let's face it, the litigants surely knew before they ever had a hearing what the judge surely knew before the hearing, that he was biased, prejudiced, was no way going to have a fair hearing. He was going to end up ridiculing the President of the United States and unwittingly, witlessly, putting America at risk. When we have testimony here from the FBI director saying, we will vet these people, but we have nothing against which we can check the information they give us. Yeah, we'll vet them, but we got nothing to check their information against. As Director Comey pointed out, at least in Iraq, we had government records from Iraq. We had the criminal records. But in Syria, since the Obama administration was so diametrically opposed to the Assad administration in Syria, well, the official government certainly wasn't sharing information. And since this administration said we were going to stop the Islamic State, even though we did nothing from the administration decision, at least, decisions, but helped the Islamic State grow bigger and stronger, and kept sending weapons, material to what this the Obama administration thought or said were repeatedly allowing the weaponry, the heavy artillery, tanks, to fall into the hands of the Islamic State. Well, the Islamic State was not sharing the information they had about the people of Syria. And in fact, Mr. Baghdadi made clear that they were going to get some of their best warriors mixed in with refugees, and they surely have, when you have judges who close their eyes, wet their finger, and hold it up for liberal friends to blow on so they know which direction they should move. Well, we get bad decisions that put the nation at risk. And for those of us who've spent much of our lives studying history, it's very clear, since you know no nation lasts forever, then you look at important milestones along the rise and along the demise. And these are the kind of decisions that lead to a country's demise. When you refuse to recognize what your enemies say, that they are your enemies, they're going to destroy your way of life, they're going to get refugees who are terrorists into your country because you're so stupid, you don't know how to defend yourself. You want to pat yourself on the back for being so open-minded and open-doored that you allow your killer to come in and kill you, just like the proverbial song and tale, taking in a snake, warming it, bringing it back to life, and it bites the rescue, or the tale of the tortoise carrying the scorpion across the water and then being stung. When people tell you they despise your way of life, they're going to bring your way of life down. When their documents tell you that they believe that you are infidels and need to be destroyed, there has to be somebody at the top of the country's leadership that understands the risks and stands up to protect the country. And when people like these judges take the Constitution into their own hands, rip it up, and say, I don't care what restrictions we have on us. I don't have any restrictions. I'm a federal judge for life. Well, that's only so long as the judge has good behavior, and these judges have not had good behavior. They have taken powers unto themselves. Their name might as well be Chavez or Morsi, taking power into their own hands that they were never supposed to have. But at least in the case of Chavez and possibly Morsi, they won elections. There was a great deal of fraud involved in Morsi's election. It's questionable whether he actually won, but the threats eliminated any contest to the election results. But the 30 million or so that went to the streets and demanded his ouster in Egypt, the greatest public step in world history, demanding the removal of an unconstitutional leader in world history. Never been 30 million people go to the streets peacefully. It wasn't all peace, but the part that wasn't peace was caused by the Muslim Brotherhood. It's why they've been labeled as a terrorist organization, and that's why the United States should label them as a terrorist organization. Regardless of what anybody thinks about President Trump, his order was an attempt to protect Americans, and judges who think they are unaccountable, because we haven't impeached near enough, become dictators, seize power that was never given to them. And that's why I've got a bill that we're preparing that would eliminate any jurisdiction for any federal court other than the Supreme Court to take up an issue involving immigration or refugees, other than immigration courts, but not on a constitutional level, not to issue an injunction to stop a congressional action or a presidential action. That would have to come from the Supreme Court. That's the way it ought to be. When the Constitution was written, there was only one federal court provided for. That was the United States Supreme Court. Any other court that is federal in this country owes its life, its jurisdiction to the U.S. Congress. As some have said in other applications, we brought them into the world and we can take them out. As far as their courts are concerned, And we need to do that. We need to take their courts out of the business of making decisions that overrule congressional and presidential action on refugees and our national security when it's involved with those refugees. And at a hearing that Dr. Walid Perez and Steve King, my friend from Iowa, set up, held yesterday, very touching stories. Christians, Yazidis, persecution of Jews in the Middle East. We heard from people that know what it is to be persecuted by radical Islamists. They see how stupid the policies have been in this country. Heard from one of our people in Homeland Security Department that the massive millions and millions of dollars that Congress appropriated to be used in countering violent extremism, an inarticulate euphemism, that we've spent millions on things like teaching young school choirs Muslim songs. Now, that's why one of the contributing factors to the senseless Orlando killings, San Bernardino killings, Boston Marathon killings, a contributing factor is that we have wasted millions and millions of dollars, maybe billions, on outreach programs that should not necessarily be the role of some parts of our law enforcement. When I challenged the FBI Director Mueller that they had not even gone to the mosque where Tsarnaev went to find out if his pattern had changed, his behavior had changed. You know, was he memorizing more and more scripture than he ever had? We often hear after these shootings take place or these killings, bombings, well, he was becoming more and more religious. Well, that can be an indication that somebody has become radicalized. There are a number of factors. Kim Jensen, the FBI, that prepared 700 pages or so training people how to spot radical Islamists. Well, he had his 700 pages purged from training materials for a long period of time. Now, finally, they realized somebody really needs to know what radical Islam is. They allowed some of the training materials to be used again, maybe all of them, but only for a limited number of FBI agents, as I understand it. We had material that was removed from the purge, or during the purge of our State Department, Homeland Security Department, intelligence departments, agencies, during the purge of their training materials, removed what our federal agents need to know in order to be able to spot if somebody is no longer a peace-loving Muslim, but now has been radicalized and wants to kill American infidels. There are things that can be spotted if you know what to look for. And we have people that know how to train for those things. Phil Haney with Homeland Security knew. And because he was able, with his scientific methodology of finding the connections between radical Islamists, as we've heard publicly, he had identified 800 who may be terrorists, have terrorist ties, and they reviewed 400, and nearly every one of them ended up being named as on the terrorist watch list. But the other 400 were not ever analyzed. No telling how many of those potential terrorist individuals may actually kill people, kill Americans someday, if they haven't already. Although Secretary Napolitano said, you know, we get pinged and we connect the dots, yet she was secretary when somebody high, maybe her, but probably someone else, was eliminating the dots. Thousands of pages of dots. Dots showing terrorist ties, they wiped them out. They erased them. Phil Haney saw it as it was happening, was able to capture much that was being deleted that would allow us to know who in the United States has terrorist ties. Under President Obama, our ability to identify our enemy was greatly weakened. And now we have judges that will put us even further at risk. But you see it repeatedly through history. When a nation's leaders begin to think they are so wise, so above the fray, that they refuse to recognize a direct threat to the nation, then the nation it speeds up its trip to that dustbin of history. And my continued hope and prayer is that this administration will reverse that slide. I know there are many that say that you have a cycle, whether it was ancient Greece, Rome, other societies, where they pursue freedom, they have some freedom, they begin to lose freedom, they fall under a dictatorship, totalitarian regime, and then the cycle goes on. But my reading of history leads me to believe perhaps it's more like, can be like bell-shaped curves, where you can go up, create more and more freedom, have periods where you lose freedoms, but if you have a generation or two that stands up and recaptures those freedoms, you could have another bell-shaped curve. It doesn't have to be a cycle where you completely lose your freedom, but the way we're headed, this will happen. I was hearing from my friend Secretary Tom Price yesterday that there are 76,000 employees in Health and Human Services. And we're not talking about people that even put Band-Aids on those who need medical care. We're talking mainly about bureaucrats. It's one of the things that contributed so mightily to the increased cost of health care. So many more bureaucrats were being hired, had to be hired. More and more regulations. You had IRS agents by the thousands that had to be hired in order to implement Obamacare. They weren't going to help anybody's health. Might actually cause problems with people's health, ulcers at least. But this nation is at risk. We have gotten a reprieve, a chance to catch our breath, restore freedom. As I've said before, for those who have read 1984 by George Orwell, the main thing that Orwell got wrong was the date. Because we now have eyes in our homes, wherever we are, that are staring at us, allow the government to stare at us through our own computers, through our own smartphones. And watching the movie of 1984, it actually is this eye like a picture, but what it really is these days, they're computer screens, smartphone screens. Government can watch anytime it wants. We were assured that the government would not be doing watching like that unless they followed the law or got a FISA court warrant. But Edward Snowden showed that those of us who heard testimony and heard statements from people in authority about what they would do and not do been proven to be false. That became clear to me when I saw the affidavit seeking a warrant for Verizon's all of their data on all of their customers, all their calls, all the information, because the Fourth Amendment says it has to be, with particularity. You got to be specific what it is you're seeking. Make sure there's probable cause to believe a crime has been committed and this person committed it, and that there's evidence to show that's being sought, and then you get the warrant. It's the way I reviewed applications for warrants repeatedly when I was a judge, but not anymore. Oh, no. The guy comes in, swears to a FISA court judge that at one time I had great trust in, because we were assured, hey, these are appointed, nominated, at least confirmed federal judges. They would never violate the Constitution. Well, we found out that's just not true. They became a rubber stamp. Particularity in the affidavit we saw was, we need all the information on all the customers Verizon has. And the FISA judge, supposedly out there to protect Americans' private information, said, oh, well, that's particular enough. You want everything, all the numbers, all the information. Okay, here's the order, here's the warrant. Verizon, turn over everything you got on these, all the numbers you have. Well, so much for protection of our rights by the FISA court. We now know we're not protected by the FISA court. We can't trust the FISA court. And as I said in our hearing last week, unless, well, I've said it publicly, unless our intelligence agencies produce the culprits who violated the law and did not follow the law in masking the name, minimizing the transcripts, unless our intelligence agencies can root out the people that have been violating the law, I will vote against the reauthorization of 702. I know they say, oh, we need all this power to keep us safe. Well, we have competing interests here. On the one hand, we have a government that yearns to be bigger and bigger and know more and more until it knows everything about everybody. And on the other hand, we got people wanting to be safe and wanting their government to protect. But when government officials can get every information about your private life, then why do we even need a Congress? You got bureaucrats making your decisions, know all about you. Might as well let them make the rest of your personal decisions. They know everything else you know. So we're living in a dangerous time, but the judges have got to be reined in, and I hope that my colleagues will join us in restricting the ability of a district or circuit court, any federal court other than the Supreme Court, taking up these type of national security issues involving refugees or immigrants, because it looks like that's the best thing we can do at this time. In the meantime, I do intend to review more information about these two judges, Hawaii, Maryland, any others that may join hands as they jump off the cliff, and see if their conduct seems to be sufficient bad conduct to require their removal from office. And I know this will be looked at as a political thing, but it is not. We're talking about the freedoms of every Democrat, every Republican, everybody that's not identified with a party, every American. The judges have overtaken the Constitution. In the name of political correctness, we've ended up, apparently, according to the information that's coming out, allowing people who happen to be Muslim to have total access to our congressional computer systems. This article from March 15th in the Conservative Review by Luke Rosiak, and apparently he has done a great deal of digging on this story. So he seems to have more stories about it. Well, let me touch on the one from March 13th. Congressional IT staffers who are the subject of a criminal investigation into misusing their positions had full access to members' correspondence, emails, confidential files, and there was almost no tracking of what they did, a former House technology worker said. Imran Awan bullied Central IT to bend the rules for him so there wouldn't be a paper trail about the unusually high permissions he was requesting. And their actions were not logged, so members have no way of knowing what information they may have taken, the Central IT employee said. Awan ran technology for multiple House Democrats, and soon 4 of his relatives, including brothers Abid and Jamal, appeared on the payroll of dozens of other members of Congress, collecting $4 million in taxpayer funds since 2010. U.S. Capitol Police named him and his relatives as subjects of a criminal probe on February 2nd and banned them from the complex's computer networks. But members of Congress for whom they worked have downplayed their access or publicly ignored the issue. And of course, the reason is no one wants to be seen as a racist. Being Muslim is not a race. It's a religion. And for some, it's not only a religion, it's a form of government that some, fortunately a minority, think should replace our own Constitution. Anyway, the article goes on, quote, they had access to everything. Correspondence, emails, confidential files. If it was stored on the member system, they had access to it. The former House Information Resources Technology worker with firsthand knowledge of Imran's privileges told the Daily Caller News Foundation. Technology employees who work for members must initially get authority from HIR, a component of the House's Chief Administration Officer, which maintains campus-wide technology systems. Quote, there are some things like access to House email system that were totally controlled by the technicians at HIR. In order for certain permissions to be granted, a form was required to ensure that there was a paper trail for the requested changes. Imran was constantly complaining that he had to go through this process and trying to get people to process his access requests without the proper forms. Some of the permissions he wanted would give him total access to the members' stuff, unquote. And again, he used the threat of calling someone bigoted because he was Muslim if he was not given the total access that this being investigated as a criminal said he needed. And it is amazing how many people gave him full access he wanted without the proper credentials, without the proper background investigation, because no one wanted to be called bigoted since he was Muslim. IT staff at HIR can be tracked for every keystroke they make, the worker said. But by comparison, when these guys were granted access to the members' computer system, there is no oversight or tracking of what they may be doing on the members' system. For example, they could make a copy of anything on the members' computer system to a thumb drive or have it sent to a private server that they had set up and no one would know. Well, that raises questions about why members are so quick to brush off the seriousness of the investigation. Mr. Speaker, as you know, we're not hearing a lot of people talk about it, not seeing a bunch of stories about it, but this is critical to the ongoing of Congress's actions. You can't have privileged communications that allow us to know what's going on in the departments, agencies over which we have oversight. You can't be leaking, you can't have access to that kind of information. The wrong people know everybody we talk to, everything that's said. They know how to fend off and best come after America. They know how to manipulate us and do so much easier and better. You don't have to be, apparently, get access to the Democratic National Committee's emails. I'm still really interested to know if any of these 5 who didn't have proper background investigations that worked on so many of our Democrat friends' computer systems, if they possibly helped set up the Democratic National Committee's computer system. After being notified by House Administration Committee, a bid was removed from our payroll. This is a quote. "We are confident that everything in our office is secure," unquote. Hillary Chambers, Chief of Staff for Democratic Representative Sandra Levin of Michigan, told the DCNF. Multiple House IT workers said it is impossible for members' offices to make that judgment, and that Capitol Police, who are running an investigation that involves cyber crimes and current and potential international fugitives, despite their primary duties being providing physical security, aren't capable of determining what actually occurred either. The Capitol Police webpage listing their authority, scope of work, and expertise does not mention the word computers. A Fairfax County, Virginia police report shows that the brother's stepmother called the police on them in January, and a relative said Imran has been out of the country attempting to access assets stored in Pakistan in his deceased father's name. The relative said they forced her to sign power of attorney documents against her will. After naming them as suspects in a criminal investigation, the Capitol Police have not taken their passports or arrested them. The brothers previously took a $100,000 loan from a fugitive by U.S. authorities, Dr. Ali al-Attar, who has fled to Iraq and been linked to Hezbollah. Just gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling, Mr. Speaker, that we've got people with ties owing money to known associates of Hezbollah terrorist organization, and they're having full access to members' computers. This says Imran ran technology for Florida Rep. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who resigned as head of the Democratic National Committee after a disastrous email hack that was blamed on Russians and had the password to an iPad used for DNC business. Politico described the investigation this way, quote, 5 House staffers are accused of stealing equipment from members' offices without their knowledge and committing serious, potentially illegal violations on the House I.T. network, unquote. But it later said Hill staffers were downplaying the information security component, writing, quote, sources close to the House investigation said the former staffers, while able to view some member data, did not have access to any classified information, unquote. That description rankled multiple House IT workers who told the DCNF those semantics misleadingly made it seem like they didn't have access to extremely sensitive information. Classified is a terminology used by spy agencies and other executive branch agencies, not generally Congress, with the exception of the Intelligence Committee. The full email correspondence and hard drives of members of Congress are nonetheless sensitive, extremely private, and likely to contain privileged information of the report. And an email need not deal with national security to open that member to blackmail or extortion. All a rogue IT staffer would need to do was threaten to release emails that were politically embarrassing. The central IT staffer said any suggestion that the brothers' access didn't span the full gamut of congressional intrigue was silly because they are the ones giving out permissions. Quote, when a new member begins, they guide them on everything from which computer system to purchase, to which constituent management system to go with, and all other related hardware purchases. They install everything and set up all the accounts and grant all the required permissions and restrictions, the staffer said. In effect, they are given administrative control of the members' computer operations. They then set up a remote access so they can connect from wherever they are and have full access to everything on the member's system. Numerous members of Congress who employed the suspects wouldn't say whether they've been fired or what steps they've taken to examine whether their information is safe. Spokesmen for a number of members of Congress all ignored requests or refused to say. The central IT workers said they were ignoring the problem in the hopes it will go away, but their apathy speaks to the problem. Unfortunately, as the recent election has shown, security of computer systems on the Hill is not really taken seriously. So we're told now, this article from March 15th says that the Capitol Police are getting outside help. We will see. Might I inquire how much time I have?
You have 5 minutes.
In the remaining time, I want to address the question of Obamacare. 2 years ago, when Joe Biden was vice president, making him president of the Senate, there was a compromise. Instead of doing complete and full repeal of Obamacare, as Republicans have been promising for years, there was a compromise. All right, we'll take out all but the regulatory authority, those things that actually caused the greatest increase in expense. But it didn't change the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we had made a pledge to America that I didn't help write, but our leaders of the Republican Party in the House did. And it said, because the new health care law kills jobs, raises taxes, increases the cost of health care, we will immediately take action to repeal this law. Then it goes into some detail about that. Then we know we had the better way. Speaker Ryan, our leadership, current leadership's better way. And this was from June 22nd of 2016. The plan begins by laying out 5 principles. It begins by repealing Obamacare. That's all of it as its first principle. And the last sentence of the paragraph says, we need a clean start in order to pursue the patient-centered reforms the American people deserve. And that's exactly right. And I was glad that leadership of our party put that in there, because we needed a full repeal. But 2 years ago, it wasn't a complete repeal, more so than what is being done now, and we're being told is the new bill. It was more repeal then, but even then, we wanted to do a full repeal, but we were told because Joe Biden could come over from the White House, come down Pennsylvania Avenue, and take the presiding officer's seat straight down the hall, that he would likely rule that other part was not in compliance with the Byrd Rule. In essence, the Byrd Rule basically means if something is merely incidental in its effect on the budget instead of a direct effect on the budget, then it may not be considered under the procedure that was being used. And that procedure only requires 51 votes. So the thing that everybody knew back then is if it were a Republican in the presiding officer's seat, of course, we'd say all of this, especially the part that was taken out, would survive the Byrd Rule, because it's not just an incidental effect on the budget. It is the most dramatic effect on the budget of most any bill that Congress has ever taken up. Dramatic, and not incidental, dramatic. And so now we're told, look, everybody needs to get on board with this new bill. It doesn't go as far as the one 2 years ago, but, and it leaves all these regulations and things, all that power 1,400 times. The secretary apparently says the secretary will make the rules, regulations to end the bill. But we're being told it's okay. You don't have to knock those out because now we have Secretary Price that can do that. Well, for one thing, if he could, then that would mean when the next Secretary of Health and Human Services comes along that's a Democrat, we can put them all back. We hadn't done anything. We hadn't accomplished anything. We just had a little breather. But we're also told the prices will likely continue up. There may be a 10% drop of the 2 to 4 times that healthcare costs, health insurance costs at least, are increasing. But since we know it will be a Republican in the chair, then the Republican in the chair in the Senate will be free to do the right thing and say honestly, truthfully, absolutely, the repeal of all this regulatory mess is dramatically going to affect the budget, not incidentally, so it survives the Byrd Rule, it stays in. There are things that are in the new bill that probably won't survive that analysis, that have been added. Why don't we do what we promised for 7 long years, repeal all of Obamacare? But we're told there's a second bucket, a second stage, where Secretary Tom Price, in whom I've got great faith, because he knows health care, he knows health care law, but he can change those regulations. Well, we also know that this is going to be taken to court as the conservative appellate Chief Justice that I was at one time. I would probably look and say, wait a minute. The law gives you the power to create regulations to implement the bill. It doesn't give you the power to make regulations that will destroy the bill. So it won't have to be a liberal judge that can knock down regulations. And I remember my late friend Justice Scalia, not talking about a particular case, but talking about the issue of when Congress doesn't do something and has a lawsuit to do it instead. Justice Scalia said, if you guys in Congress don't have the guts to stop something you have the power to stop, Don't come running over to the Supreme Court to demand we do it. You do your job. That's not our job. And that's the case with Obamacare. It needs to be repealed, as Mitch McConnell said, root and branch, and it survives the Byrd rule, and then we really help America.